Welcome to another edition of the Kendrick Loves to Brand podcast. We are here with a good friend of mine, James Pacaba of Morningtide. James, how are you?
I'm good, Kendrick. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I see that even if you're working from home, you're always dressed up pa rin.
I'm passionate about my suits. It's a nice way to have some normalcy during these really extraordinary times. So,
I had a feeling you're gonna be all dappered up. Like I purposely just wore a dress down t-shirt lang para ano, para may contrast. How are
it's
things?
okay. It's okay. Every time we see each other, we're dressed the same. So, yeah.
how are things? With the whole pandemic situation. How are you coping with it? How are your clients coping with it?
Well, the interesting thing is that we find there's actually more work to do for us during this pandemic situation. As you know, uh, one of our key services is CFO services. So that's a lot of that is monitoring your cash flow and figuring out how to make it more efficient. So this pandemic, more than anything, what our clients and partners are having to grapple with is really the drop in cash flow while
Mm.
trying to keep up with operating expenses, particularly manpower, because there have been holidays naman in terms of rental and other expenses. So it's really a gap in terms of cash flow, and a lot of our clients are really living week to week. So I have really intensive cash flow forecasting meetings with my clients on almost a weekly basis, so that they can figure out, how much money do they have remaining until they run out completely, and what are the funding sources that they can find in order for them to be able to keep the lights on. How much can they afford to? I have a lot of clients that want to keep all of their employees, fully employed, but they have to balance that against the ability for them to keep the business open. So a lot of the discussions we have actually is how much can they really afford to give away to the employees? How does that sort of play out in the broader sweep of their cash flow on a monthly and on an annual basis? So those are the things that we've had to do over the course of the pandemic. There's a lot of work to do. It's very stressful, but I think we're kind of lucky in that sense that at least there is work for us to do, as opposed to some others who are very hard hit by the
Yeah,
pandemic.
correct. So before we get deeper into things, so it would be helpful if you can give the audience here a little bit of an idea of what Morningtide does. You mentioned earlier the CFO services, but maybe it would be better if you can give the whole picture of what Morningtide is and what you guys do.
Sure, happy to do it. So, Morningtide is a financial advisory firm. We're actually based out of Singapore, but we operate mostly in the Philippines. Um, Morningtide grew out of a belief that a lot of what's holding Philippine businesses back is this kind of very very outdated cash flow culture that we have here. Basically, you encounter a lot of entrepreneurs who are proud of not understanding their own financials. They know how much money went in, how much money went out, but they don't understand deeper financial metrics about the company. And there's a culture here that people are almost proud of that. There's also a culture here that people are proud not to have any debt on the balance sheet, right? So very outdated ways of running your finances. So the belief that we had is that if you're able to fix these things, have a proper financial information system that helps companies make the correct financial decisions to power their growth, as well as a culture of corporate governance where they understand how to deal with external stakeholders like shareholders, debt holders, what do you call this, and other types of creditors, the banks.
Mhm.
Um, it will create a freer flow of capital into small, medium, and large size businesses in order for a more vibrant Philippine uh, business setting. So that's really where we came out. So our business verticals reflect that. So we have two major verticals. So the first major vertical is the CFO services uh, vertical. So what we do there is we come up with periodic cash flow forecasts to help our clients visualize what is going to happen to the business within a year, 5 years, and even as granular as 1 week, 1 month. And the objective of that is for them to be able to allocate resources. So, for example, you have a client that has budget only for, say, customer service training versus budget for marketing spend, right? Where do they allocate it? So we plug the numbers into the financial model to help them decide between those things. Because our belief is that finance. A lot of people see it as a function,
Mhm.
like something that you have to do. But actually, finance can be a strategy. It's a weapon that you can use to make your business more efficient and more powerful, right? And the other vertical of the business is really the fundraising component. So we help medium to large companies either find financing, either bank financing, uh, equity financing, and hybrid securities in between, as well as execute trade sales. So right now, for example, we're working on a very large sale of a furniture maker, local furniture manufacturer. So it's a pretty big deal. That's quite interesting. So we're learning about that industry and what drives value there. So yeah, those are the two major businesses that we engage in as Morning Time.
There are a lot of things that I want to pick up from what you said. Obviously, we've worked together also for one of my companies, so I'm quite familiar with
Sure.
what you guys do. But for the audience, I think one of the questions they'll have is, given that everything you said, with regards to the culture here, um, and the services that you guys have, I would say, I guess, for the regular SME, it would sound something like it's too sophisticated for them to even consider availing. Would you
Right.
agree that's been something that a lot of your prospects or clients initially have as a concern?
So that is true in some respects. So what we've seen is that there's certainly more ability for medium to large size companies to avail of our services. That said, just to share, we're actually working on a telefinance product
Mhm.
in our company for the SME sector. So basically, the idea is that you can call in, talk to an analyst, and have them answer, finance-related questions about your business. Again,
A call a friend.
anything
Right.
from yeah, yeah. Something simple as, oh, there's this branding agency that's telling me that I should spend on branding, right? Should I do it, right? And then the analyst will ask them a few questions like, oh well, what's your OPEX, what's your total sales, what's your COGS, right? And then you can sort of identify already from there whether they should do the expense or not, right? Should I rent real property, or should I just buy the property and sort of operate it over time? Should I outsource delivery, or should I buy a motorcycle? So simple decisions like this, build or buy decisions. What do you call this? Asset allocation decisions, resource allocation decisions can be answered over the phone, and we think that will drive tremendous value for SMEs. So that's something that we're working on right now, and we're hoping to launch it within the next couple of months.
Do you have an idea
That said,
what the
sorry,
fees will be for somebody to call and get questions answered?
that's something that we're working on still, but we aim for this to be really really accessible. So probably maybe not more than 5,000 pesos for a consultation.
Okay.
Probably we're aiming for something below that for sure, like much lower.
Oh.
We're probably comparable to maybe a doctor's consultation or something like
Mhm.
that. So
Okay.
that's what we're aiming for.
All right. And the other thing that was, I think, would be very interesting for a lot of entrepreneurs is the idea of raising money, and also what you mentioned earlier about helping sell a business. I think that's one of the things that I think locally, especially the latter part of it, we don't have that culture yet of exits or thinking of exits as part of your business plan. So is that
Right, right.
something that you guys would you say you specialize in compared to like because I think there are a few shops around that that also offer this kind of services.
Right, right. Well, I would say that our core business is really the CFO services component right now,
Mhm.
and but we are actually rapidly building up the what do you call this? The trade sale and fundraising component of the business. So we recently have brought on some new partners that really build up that side of the business. So now we have more reliable access to high level investors. So it's something that is a growth area for us. And actually, if ECQ had it hit, I think would be something that we could rapidly grow and execute. Yeah.
In terms of selling companies, what has been the biggest I would say insight in terms of the market here? Like how aggressive is the market here for M&As or buyouts?
So the challenge in the market here is we're really a very multiples based market, meaning the buyer just wants to look at the how much revenue the company's making, or more commonly how much net income the company's making, multiply it by a figure, and then
Yeah.
that's the buying price. So finding and of course for entrepreneurs who've built their businesses over decades, it's a very emotional thing
Hmm.
to sell. It's almost like giving up your firstborn child to be married, right? And you don't know this person, right, who's going to buy it. So the challenge is really finding that happy middle ground, because buyers here in the Philippines, because the capital markets are a bit illiquid, their their asking prices are very low versus what a lot of sellers would like to see, and that's really the biggest challenge that we found when it comes to a trade sale in the Philippines.
So is it correct in my understanding? It's almost like you're saying the buyers are the budget that they have to acquire companies is a lot bigger than what most of the companies that are available for sale are can be acquired for. Is that?
Um, so actually, what do you call this? I think to your point. So there's two layers here, right? So for foreign buyers, like foreign private equity, you'll notice that private equity funds from abroad are actually not very active here in the Philippines, because our deal sizes are really, really very small,
Mhm.
right? So to give you an idea, for example, we talked to some private equity funds where their minimum bite size is I think 1.5 billion pesos for a minority stake in the company. So that's like 30% of the company. So if you need to be like a 4.5 billion peso company for them to consider investing in you, right? So the challenge, and that's understandable, because the amount of work that it takes to do a 1.5 billion peso deal versus a 300 million peso deal is the same, right?
Mhm.
You have to do the background checks, you have to do the industry studies, you need to review the company, see how well it's run, right? So it's perfectly understandable, right? But because there is a lack of ability to access foreign funds, the only game in town is really either the big conglomerates, and the thing with them is they're able to build a lot of the stuff themselves. They don't need to buy it, right? So maybe you'll see them investing in technology companies. So obviously, Globe and Smart have their startup incubators, and
Mhm.
they do their fair share of acquisitions, right? But for them, it's going to be build or buy as a decision. So if you think about it from a pricing standpoint, that already depresses your prices. Like, we were working on a school deal with one of the big conglomerates, and really, the the pricing from them, they don't. it won't matter what the trajectory of the school is. What matters to them is, okay, if I build the school with 1,000 students, right, it's going to cost me this much to build it. So if I'm gonna buy it na lang, it has to be a bit cheaper than that, right? So that's
Okay.
right. And then for ano naman, for private investors, so synergistic investors, which is what we like to tap. So for example, people in the same industry, so sell the smaller school to a bigger school, right? There is also that, they're kind of kuripot, I guess is the it's really kind of from a standpoint, Philippine culture is one of thriftiness. So it kind of bleeds into the deal making culture here also in the Philippines. So it's very, very hard to find that common ground. So the objective is really for our companies to be big enough so that they can access foreign private equity. But obviously, we're a long way from that.
How much does this is going to be a self-serving question, but how
Yeah.
much does branding play? How big of a role does branding play in terms of let's say when you mentioned that when an acquirer looks at a potential company to acquire, and then they if they look at it and say, well, maybe I can just build it myself. Does branding play a role, at least here in the Philippines?
So, what do you call it? It does, right? But it's going to depend on the size of the deal. So, like for example, if you're looking at a while back, we were actually uh, selling a restaurant company to one of the new upcoming conglomerates. You can probably guess who it is,
Yeah.
who's been buying restaurants. And what do you call this? Any way you crunch the metrics, the restaurant chain we were offering was significant value. The financial performance was better. It was better run. What do you call this? And the brand was not bad. The brand was actually quite good. But versus a company that has far inferior fundamentals but a fantastic brand, they actually acquired the company with a really, really fantastic brand. But I noticed that uh, you have to be really, really big and have a nice brand. Then you can get acquired. Your fundamentals matter a little bit less there. But if you're kind of small, the brand is a harder sell. They'll really push hard on, yeah, but we can build that also naman. So, it's not going to drive so much value. So, it's very, very case to case. But of course, much better to have a really, really good brand. But the brand, especially if the deal is small, must be able to demonstrate, you know, uh, must be able to translate directly into the financials. Meaning, people really buy it over the nearest competitor. It really makes the product stickier. People stick to the brand, right? So those are key considerations. But the brand by itself, without translating into any of those metrics, it won't translate
Oh my
into
God.
a better valuation.
Okay. So let's take a step back, and before we continue on more things about Morningtide.
Sure.
How did you get started in this line of work?
Well, what do you call it? It always been my dream to be in finance ever since I was a kid, really. But I think coming out of college, I actually came out as a political science student. I was thinking of becoming a lawyer, but I saw an advertisement for a course on financial engineering. Decided to take it because it sounded kind of cool, and I fell in love with the discipline. I actually stayed in government for a while, and then helped run a BPO. But during this time, I taught finance in a couple of top universities here. So I taught in DLSU and UANP. And I did consulting projects on the side, so valuation projects mostly. I did a few deals, uh, sold a couple of companies to Globe, among other companies, and the practice got big enough. I found myself some partners, and we decided to put up a firm to serve uh, to sort of benefit medium and large size businesses in the
So,
Philippines.
so, so when you mentioned that this was something that you've been interested in as a kid, what influenced you towards this direction? Like as a kid, like Was it like your parents, or like is it Wall
Yeah.
Street, or
Well, it's actually a very, very specific thing. So I'd always wanted to be a businessman. My dad was a businessman, but he was an engineer, so he ran an elevator company. I was pretty sure I didn't want to do specifically that, but I wanted to be in business. And one day in school, there was this sort of, you bring your parent to work day and then they talk about their career. But the interesting thing they did, so I went to LaSalle Green Hills, so we have really, really big batch sizes. Was that you could look at a giant directory of whose parents were coming, like what careers were
oh,
there, and you can
okay.
go to any classroom you want. So, and I remember this very clearly. I went to this classroom where one of the guys was an investment banker. And, he was there. I remember he was like a skinny, tall fellow in a barong, and he talked about what he did. I don't even remember what he said anymore. But that at that moment, I said to myself, yeah, I want to be that. Right. And at first, I thought an investment banker and a stockbroker were the same thing. But I learned much later on that it's actually a different thing. But yeah, I think that's really where the dream started and something that I've tried to pursue.
What are the downsides to this field, in terms of like when you introduce yourself to somebody and say this is what you do? What's the weirdest thing or misconception that you've gotten?
Oh well, I won't. It's not weird, but I find it. To be honest, like finance people get annoyed by it. Is that like accounting? Like that's the most common. That's the most common thing that we get. So I have a range. I have a bunch of clients that say, yeah, yeah, but we have that already. We have an accountant. He reports our quarterly statements to us. What do we need you for? Right? So that's kind of the most common misconception about finance and accounting people, is that it's the same discipline. It's very different. Um, and both are equally valuable. You need a very good accountant for two things: to tell you very specifically what happened in your business in the past, right? So that's really important
Mhm.
because that actually informs the work of finance. And the second, really equally important thing is compliance, right? So you need to be able to report your books in a way that is in compliance with the law to minimize taxes while avoiding penalties as well. So that's really the function of an accountant, and the controller is the top accounting position in a firm. CFO and the finance department, their job is to forecast what's going to happen in the future. They use what's happening in the results of accounting to help those forecasts, but they also talk to the department heads. They talk to marketing, right? What are you doing this year that's going to increase sales? We're doing a massive rebrand this year, right? How do we feel is that going to impact our operations and the way that people interact with our company, right? So things like that. It's our job to take those different disciplines and to standardize the way they tell their stories about the future into something that is comparable and interoperable, right? So meaning, if I can turn marketing and sales as a story into a sales forecast, I can turn the story that operations has about manufacturing improvements and logistics. I can turn that into an OPEX forecast and
Mhm.
connect the two and see if there are mismatches between them. So we serve as translators between the different operating departments by giving them numbers that are comparable and interoperable with each other. So those are again very, very different disciplines from accounting and finance.
From what you're saying now, because I think the common idea of most entrepreneurs is when they get to a certain point, they'll say, "I need an accountant,"
Right.
and then the idea of bringing in a CFO is something that seems parang a bit farther down the road. Would you say that it should be at the same time, or like the other way around? Like should entrepreneurs think of getting a CFO, or at least somebody who can fulfill that role, let's say through outsourcing to companies like Morningtide, at an earlier point than just focusing on, I need an accountant to help me with my books?
Right. So again, as I mentioned a while ago, it's two very different disciplines. You should have accounting support from the start, so that's really important. But what do you call this? Accounting gets accessible faster than CFO services. So it's also better to have CFO at the start because it helps you plan your business, understand how you're working to grow, and to interpret your previous results. But for an early stage company, it's easier to get a full time accountant, or a sort of retainer accounting firm, than it is to start with the CFO service, right? So a true CFO is very expensive. In fact, to be frank, only the big firms really have it. So if you look at a company like Globe or like an Ayala company, for example, you'll notice that there's a different accounting department and what they call a corporate planning department.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the core plan. That's actually the finance department. Of course, it gets more granular. They have treasury. They have all these other things. But sort of from that function, it's different. That's why what we do is part-time CFO, because you also don't need a CFO all the time. At the very least, you should have one once a year when you do your planning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important. And you need one when you are doing when you're trying to make major financial decisions that relate to money. So big investment decisions in terms of hard assets or even intellectual property and knowledge transfer, like branding services or like a big rebrand or buying technology. Should I buy an accounting system or should I just use
Mm.
Excel for now? So things like that. So which is again why actually we want to get into telefinance, because you don't need it all the time. And what do you call this? But when you have it at the correct time, it can really generate a lot of growth for the company.
What do you think is the your secret to success, or what distinguishes you from other you know finance professionals?
Well, to be frank, what do you call this? There's really an entrepreneurial DNA in our organization. I know that sounds trite, but it's the truth. We've all started companies. We've run companies, so we understand. Running a company and translating it into financials better than any pure finance practitioner ever could, right? And that's something that you build over decades of running successful organizations. So I think that's it at its core. We do have a different finance language in our company. So what do you call this? It's we have our own internal training called Morningtide University, which is very robust.
Mhm.
To be frank, I would say it's one of the best finance training programs in the country. Um, so that's another thing. Learning. We have an apprenticeship program in the company where interns and analysts build financial models side by side in order, for them to get job experience really quickly. And even at a very junior position, you will be presenting to CEOs and CFOs very quickly in order to gain experience. So, it's really about, developing the people and rapidly cascading the body of knowledge of the company to the people that we bring in.
You mentioned this Morningtide University. Is this something that's only open to Morningtide employees, or is this something that you're looking to eventually, make open to the public?
We actually have plans to make it open to the public through school partnerships, but this is something that probably will be rolled out maybe next year. Right now, it's only available to interns and to analysts. But we actually have a robust year-round internship plan. So meaning you don't need to be in the internship part of your studying to intern for us. You can basically get a part-time job with us where we're happy to take you. And your background actually doesn't matter. What matters to us is that you're willing to learn. You're not afraid of numbers. But yeah, we take in interns from some of the top universities in the Philippines, and these are guys that have full time loads and are interning for us as well. So that's the kind of thing that we like to see, and that's our pipeline for future hires in our analyst positions.
What's been the biggest or what's been the toughest adversity you've had to deal with in your career as an entrepreneur?
I mean, there have been many, as you know. I remember my very first entrepreneurial venture. I had resigned from my job in the government, and I used my entire savings to finance it. And it's what I call now getting cute with the business model, because at the time, it was one of those business models where there's like 3 partnerships and everything has to go correctly, because I didn't want to spend a lot of money up front, and obviously something went wrong, right? So I remember very specifically, I was sitting with the guy who was running it for me, in the car, and we had decided to shut it down, and I just felt numb from that. Like I just lost my life savings. Yeah, I was still young at the time, so but it felt like a very big thing for me. That was really really tough. Obviously, there have been other failures since then. Fraud. I remember the first mistake I made in a deal where what do you call this? We did all the due diligence we needed to do. We ran the documents through a couple of lawyers. We even background checked the counterparty. But if the mistake is going to happen, it's going to happen. We missed a single document that allowed somebody to run away with, to get away with some fraud in the deal. And it was, luckily it was not a very large amount, but it's still one of those things that I felt responsible for, and was a really painful learning experience for me. And nothing in business is easy. I'm sure there are setbacks that are going to come, that we can't foresee. But definitely, those are a couple of things that have been difficult.
Do you ever experience self-doubt? And how do you deal
All the
with it?
time.
Oh, yeah. In what way, if you don't mind sharing?
I mean, at the start, for sure. Especially, to be frank here, I have to sit in a room and tell somebody who's made billions of pesos that I know how to manage their money better than them, right? And that's a that's a that's a tall order, right? And it's not, so that's something that I have to deal with whenever I have to present to somebody very very important. I mean, I remember the first time I had to give a pitch to Lance Gokongwei, and I know that guy knows his finance, right? So I was literally shaking in the in the meeting room, before it happened. But for me, when you do your homework, and your stuff, the fear goes away almost immediately once you're doing the thing. You'll always, well, at least for me, I still always feel afraid before. Even teaching, to be honest, like I still feel nervous before giving a class, even though I feel I have a good amount of expertise. The fear will always be there. It's really what you do after and through it that where your quality will show.
Who do you look up to in your field? Like, is there somebody that, aside from the guy in the barong long time ago, is there someone that you look up to in the world of finance?
Definitely several. Of course, you can't talk about finance without talking about Buffett. And for
Yeah.
me, what do you call this? Learning about Buffett and value investing. My approach isn't exactly value investing, but the fundamentals of it is something that has changed my life forever. Basically, um, reading about it taught me that companies are not abstract pieces of financial information that's on paper. They're organizations of people and resources moving through this organization and creating value, right? So understanding the organization, right? Being able to, in his terms, explain it to a 7-year-old. That is the surest way to support an investment decision. So for me, definitely Buffett. Locally, it's a little more esoteric, but uh, actually before the big investment banks you see in the Philippines today, there was an investment bank called Bancom, which pioneered investment banking in the Philippines. It was partnership between, I think, a local bank and Bank of America. That's why it's Bancom. So the people who started that, particularly the founder, whose name is Sixto Rojas, are people that I really look up to, because these are people that went into a third world country and pioneered, an entire industry, investment banking, just the innovations in terms of, financial instruments that came out of that organization. Uh, was crazy. It was like the age of legend, actually, because the people who work there are almost all CEOs today. Like Manny Pangilinan worked in Bancom, Gabby Lopez worked in Bancom. So some of the the top bankers in the country. We're lucky to have a couple of Bancom alumni actually on our board of advisors in Morningtide. So I'm including the founder, Sixto Rojas, who I'm very privileged to be able to learn from. So, those are things, because that's what we aspire to do, is to pioneer, a new way of doing finance in the Philippines, creating new financial instruments that will allow companies to do business better.
Well, I'm pretty sure your answer to this would be Warren Buffett. But given the chance to have a one-on-one mentoring, so we'll change the question a little bit. Let's say you get the chance to sit down with Warren Buffett, and you only had
Okay.
one question that you can ask him. What would you ask?
Oh my, that is tough, because I've read a lot of his books, and a lot of his shareholder letters. So, what do you call this? I wouldn't want to ask him one of the generic ones. Like what's the one thing I need to know about investing? I feel like that's in his books already.
Uh-huh.
So I would probably ask him, what is the toughest thing that he had to do, in his discipline in finance, and how did he navigate it? What did he learn from it? So I think stories about adversity is something that you can't capture just from reading about it. I think there's a lot of insight from that you can get from having a real conversation with the person.
Nice. I like that.
Thank you.
What? Okay. Well, actually, now this is a. How do you stay productive, at least during this time? Like you mentioned, at least dressing up for work still is one of the things you do. What other things would you or do you practice to stay productive?
Well, we're lucky to live in a fairly large compound, so I'm able to walk my dogs every morning and every evening. So we walk about, I think, 4 kilometers total. So 2 kilometers in the morning, 2 kilometers in the evening. The thing I haven't been able to really do is exercise. You know that I play a lot of tennis.
Oh
Obviously, that's not
yes.
possible right now. So that's not been possible. But I've been playing a lot of music. So I play the violin, and I've been practicing every day, so that's quite helpful as well. Other than that, again, things have actually been busier for me now than normally, because where before I had to travel between meetings, now so like 4 or 5 meetings a day is tiring already. Now I can easily do 12 meetings a day. Some 30-minute meetings sprinkled in between. So you're able to stay very productive. And then my fiance also cooks a lot, and obviously I help a bit where I can, right? So I feel like I've been quite productive during the crisis. I think it's really just a question of keeping yourself busy and finding stuff that you like to do.
All right. Well, since you're in that you're you deal with a lot of investments. What has been the best investment that you've made in your years as an entrepreneur?
It's gonna be trite again. So okay, I'll give you two answers.
Okay.
What do you call this? I guess the simplest answer is my education. So that's number one, and that's still for me something that I don't regret. And at the time, it was a painful investment to make, because it was almost my entire salary during the time when I was studying. Of course, I come from privilege in that I lived with my family, so they fed me, and I had somebody to pick me up from school after, but I didn't have disposable income, at least at the time. So that was a sacrifice I had to make, and something that I never regretted. In terms of personal investment, what do you call this? Probably one of my favorite investments is actually just lending money to somebody you know and you trust. Like a lot of my personal money is actually in what I call high yield debt. So high interest debt to somebody that I know. So that's very very simple. You can understand it. The only thing you need to understand is who is this person. Can you count on them to pay you back? And making sure that the debt is something that they can afford to pay back, right? So the other version of this, if you're somebody who's new, is trading. So that's what I would do. Like the best entry level businesses are lending or trading because it's not so complicated, and either you just know who you're lending to, or you know who you are, or you know the product that you're buying in the market that you're selling. So I think those are really good places to start.
Okay. Like normally, I would ask the guests like advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, but given the situation that everyone finds themselves in nowadays, and also I remember like one of the common conversations we used to have is back when we can still meet face to face.
Right.
Is this idea
Just
that
like forever.
yeah, it's this idea that I'm not sure like the exact phrasing, but it's like what you used to say in a lot of ways, all of us, all like entrepreneurs or business owners, we're all kind of fucked in different ways. Like different levels of like struggles and all that. Diba? Uh,
Right.
as somebody in your position who's been involved with a lot of businesses and who help like oversee a lot of businesses, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs out there, or to fellow business owners out there, um, on how they can get unfuck?
Well, if you remember the situation, you're only unfucked for like a very very brief period of time. Like to be honest, when I started my company, I felt super fucked. If you compare now to when I started it, it's so much better than before, but I still feel fucked, and I'm sure you feel the same way. And I've
Yeah.
met again people who are making billions of pesos who still feel fucked. So I think feeling fucked is the human condition, right? So I think for me, it's not about being unfucked. It's about uh, choosing how you're fucked, right? So you and I are fucked, but we feel fucked, but we're doing something that we care about. There's a mission behind what we're trying to do, and that's great, right? And then being able to select the people around you who you're fucked with, that's the other thing. So having a great support structure, either home, friends who really care about what you do and will support you, both emotionally, right, and in terms of resources or knowledge. But most importantly, if you can find a team in your company that will support you, and I'm very blessed to have that, with my colleagues in Morningtide. So we're all fucked together, but those brief shining moments of victory where the client says well done, and you do a high five outside the meeting room. That's as unfucked as it gets, and then on to the next problem. So uh, yeah, that's my answer to that.
Apologies to the audience. It suddenly turned
Yes,
into
sorry
a
about that.
Gary V podcast with all the f bombs. But that's pretty good advice. It's really more of, I think, what you're saying is it's it's a state of mind that you're never gonna be fully like always okay. Like
Yeah,
as with life, basically, there's always gonna be a roller coaster with ups and downs. So it's a matter of how to best navigate it. I think
yeah.
it's pretty much what all the f bombs. Uh, we're
Yes.
okay. We're coming towards the latter part of the show. There are three questions I always ask all the guests.
Okay.
The first one is, knowing everything that you know now, if you were able to go back in time to when you first started, um, let's say when you first started Morningtide, which is not just a few years ago, right? Um,
Yes.
what and you had a chance to talk to yourself back then. What would you say to yourself?
Oh my gosh. What would I say to myself? I think what I would do is really tell myself to more aggressively pursue uh, like recurring revenue at the start.
Mm.
So a very pedestrian answer, but basically at the start I would pursue a lot of big projects with big payouts at the end, right? But that put the company in some financial stress because a lot of our resources were being spent on essentially non-revenue generating projects. So sort of having a little more operating discipline. I think that's really really important and something that we've come to develop over time. I think that's really what I would tell myself. Yeah, if I were to start again.
That's very good practical advice. What's the second question is, what else are you looking to accomplish over the next 10 years?
I mean, I have what do you call this? I have very very broad aspirations for the company. I really want us to be a pioneer. Just widespread financial education for entrepreneurs. A new level of corporate governance across the Philippines and a much more active private equity market in the Philippines because of that, right? And that's something that Morningtide aspires to be at the center of. Sort of this more responsible, transparent financial governance, which will benefit the economy.
I like it. So before anything else, before I ask the final question, I just wanted to acknowledge you, James. It's been a pleasure being friends over the past couple of years, and really learning a lot of um, the financial discipline and the strategies through the course of like working together and also our conversations over good food, which
Right.
I hope to be
Indeed.
able to do again soon.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, I just want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
so the final question: how do you, James, want to be remembered?
I mean, to be honest, I want to be remembered as the guy who did the next round of revolutionizing finance in the Philippines, right? So, the financial sector as it is today was the outgrowth of of previous giants that changed the way we do business, and I want to be the next round when having a proper financial planning at the start of the year, with a proper financial model. Becomes normal for all companies in the Philippines. Having, a decently sized credit line is normal, right? Like not 100% of your assets, but not also 0%, like 20, 30% of your assets are borrowed, right? So having, that being able to create, I know it's overused in the context of the current crisis, but I want to be able to create a new normal in terms of how finance is practiced, right? Making reports to shareholders normal and for companies and being able to communicate effectively to these shareholders and debt holders. I want that to be normal, and I want to be the guy who did that in the Philippines.
All right, I'm certainly looking forward to that, and I fully support what you guys are doing in Morningtide, and definitely I think increasing financial literacy, I think, for entrepreneurs is really really important. Speaking as an entrepreneur myself, I'm always looking to learn, and it's a pleasure learning from you guys. And I
Right,
really
right.
hope
Thank you,
that
thank you,
I really hope that you guys are able to accomplish that.
thank you, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, James.
Yeah, thanks, Kendrick. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review the show on iTunes. It will help more people discover the show. You can also share a screen cap of the show on your social media accounts. Make sure to tag me and let me know which part of the episode you like or didn't like. All feedback is certainly welcome, so feel free to reach out to me on Instagram @KendrickCo to let me know what topics you'd like to be covered next and who you want to hear or learn from in future episodes. Until next time, do the work you want to see done, because life's too short to not be creating your life's work.